here's the interesting thing. What do I believe free speech should be a right or a freedom? I think we tell ourselves it is. I think we pretend. It's not really. I don't think it's a true right or a true freedom. Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel, Meet Me in the Center. My name is Andrew. There's not going to be any big introduction here, just jumping right back into the freedom of speech and expression series. So here's the video. Enjoy. I believe in the freedom of speech. I believe in the freedom of expression. But a couple people I know made a very interesting point. And generally speaking, I believe in as many freedoms as possible. Some of the people I was talking to made the point of, well, if you really want a free country, shouldn't there be no limits on freedoms? In a perfect world, yes, absolutely. I completely agree with you. There should be absolutely no limits on freedoms. In a perfect world. We don't live in a perfect world. I can't wear, rose-tinted glasses when it comes to people. I have seen what people can and can't do, and our human stupidity knows no bounds. So I'll give you some examples, right? So obviously with free speech, for instance, you can't scream fire in a theater, cause panic, causing potential harm to life. You can't dictate, you can't ask for violence on someone. And there are other things too, obviously. In Canada, you can't say hate speech against the protected groups under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. But I mean, I would love for the world to just say, you're free to do whatever you want, but that, unfortunately, that will just lead to chaos. Because if people are allowed that, then they're going to take too much advantage. It's not like I would say that there's a society where, and maybe there is somewhere in Europe, I don't know, but I don't think so. Not to this point in human history anyway, where I could say, okay, well, let's do this, but even though you have all the freedoms in the world, you have to be at least somewhat socially conscious in that your country still needs to work. And I don't think there's anywhere that could do that, especially not at this point in human history. We're getting closer, maybe? I don't know that will never ever be a thing anyway, because technically if they're all freedoms, like you could kill someone and then there'd be no consequences for that. So I don't necessarily think that's a good example. And I'll give you 3 examples. First would be to do with the Second Amendment in the States. Technically, if there were full freedoms in the Second Amendment, you would be able to have predator drones and machine guns and as much ammo as you needed to use those, essentially. And we can't. You just can't. So school shootings generally are done with semi-automatic rifles. Semi-automatic, by the way, does not... People get this wrong all the time. Semi-automatic just means you pull the trigger once and a bullet comes out. So it's basically as fast as you can pull the trigger. An automatic is where you hold the trigger down and it just keeps shooting until it runs out of bullets. Imagine a school shooting where a school shooter had an automatic weapon versus a semi-automatic. He can do damage with a semi-automatic. Just imagine how many more people he can kill with an automatic. He could literally go class to class and just wipe everyone out. Or she. Although most of them are usually men that do school shootings. But there's a reason why we have to have that limit. We can't just have anyone own a predator drone and, oh, I don't like this person, I'm going to go blow them up today. That just can't be a thing. Another good example of this, limits on freedom. Let's say you're on a media broadcast and you're you've just gotten in a big fight with someone and you don't like what they're doing. So you basically tell the world, this person lives at this place and I think he's a horrible person, and if you agree with me, go and hurt him. That's illegal, right? And it should be illegal. You can't provoke violence. There can't be a call for violence. And unfortunately, I think if all speech was free, I think this would happen, and I think that that would be an issue. So again, just another good reason on why we need some limitations on freedom. And the third rotates around child pornography. Before I go into it, I am against child pornography in every way, shape, or form. I don't know why I have to point that out, but if I don't, there's going to be someone somewhere who's like, oh, well, he's defending child pornography. No, I'm just using it as an example as why there have to be limits. So it would be very easy for someone to claim that child pornography is a form of art. Art is protected under freedom of expression because it's cultural expression, essentially. It's a form of culture, and so it's art. So they could easily say, well, it should be protected because I believe this is art. And that would not be a thing I would want. I mean, theoretically, if it's protected, it could be posted anywhere. It could be posted online easily and never be taken down. There'd be no consequences for that. Same with revenge porn, actually, which I think we need stronger laws even now for. But revenge porn, if you don't know, is like, say a boyfriend and girlfriend are together and they film each other, or they break up, one of the two partners, but generally the male puts it online to shame the female. Sometimes it's vice versa, but generally it's the male that does it. There are laws now in most countries, but I think they could even be a little stronger when it comes to that. If you're worried about that, don't film it. Obviously, that's number one. And if you're not, if you do film it and you break up, you got to make sure you have all copies of that erased. Personally, even if I was into someone that much, I wouldn't want it filmed. And if they were really into that, like, I don't think I would let it. But if for whatever reason I did, like, if we broke up, I would literally, they could come to my place and I would show them that I've permanently deleted that, even though even then you can get it back, but I permanently deleted off of all my files, and then I would do it with them too. And that's the only way to really protect yourself against that. But the best way, like I say, is not to film it in the first place. Why are you filming it? Anyway. So those are just a couple examples, basically, of why there need to be some limits. One example that people use that it shouldn't be an example is because they disagree with something. Just because you disagree with something, I've said it before, but just because you disagree does not mean it should not be said. Because everything you say someone else will disagree with, so does that mean you get to shut up first? Again, the argument goes both ways. And if you can't see that, you're blind and stupid. That's all there is to it. You're blind and stupid. And I think you're being woefully and knowingly ignorant when it comes to that at this point. But here's the interesting thing. What do I believe free speech should be a right or a freedom? I think we tell ourselves it is. I think we pretend. It's not really. I don't think it's a true right or a true freedom. So, and what I mean by that is, if it can be taken away for whatever reason, it's not really a freedom. It's not really a right. It's George Carlin said it best. I'll link this in the description below as well if I remember. But there's a video from one of his stand-up comedy routines, and it talks about rights being temporary privileges that we pretend are more important than what they are, essentially. If your government can just say, oh, today we're not following that anymore, that's not really a right, that's not really a freedom. There's something happening in Ontario right now with the government. So I made a video about this last week, actually. Doug Ford and notwithstanding clause. The notwithstanding clause, basically what's happening is the government is going into negotiations with support staff in the schools of Ontario. Their contract is up and they're having trouble reaching an agreement. And so the school staff were going to go on strike, and Doug Ford decided that, no, I'm not going to allow you to go on strike anymore because I think that would be, and his reasoning is that he claims it would be bad for the children. I don't necessarily think it has anything to do with the children personally when it comes to him, but I don't know for sure. Obviously, that's just my opinion. But, I mean, he basically took away their right to strike. Right to strike is incidentally protected under the Ontario and the Canadian Federal Charter of Rights and Freedoms. But unfortunately, there's this clause that was put in when the Charter of Rights and Freedoms were formed that says that government essentially can decide that as long as they can pass the law in government, they can suspend most things from the Charter of Rights and Freedoms for up to 5 years if they want. How are those freedoms if they can just be suspended at a moment's notice? Like, that's not a freedom. That's just a privilege that we have until the government decides not to. And that's exactly what we're seeing from not being allowed to strike. The support staff not being allowed to strike. And again, it's being the erosion of these rights is hidden under the guise of doing something good for a group. So, for instance, he's arguing that, well, the children have lost a lot of their education for the last couple of years because of COVID anyway, so we can't really have anyone leave. And the convenient thing that he's not really saying is that, well, if they can't strike, they have no way to really no real strength in bargaining, and so eventually they're going to have to give in because they're just going to get desperate and they need any sort of increase. So it's the real reasons are hidden under the pretty guise of doing something good for the children, but I don't think it's that at all. So yeah, I mean, and I think it's the same in the States as well. I mean, there have been multiple times in your history where they have suspended constitutional rights. George Carlin talks about it in his in that stand-up about where you have no rights. He talks about the Japanese Americans. Their only crime was that they were born in a country other than America. And in World War II, they were all rounded up and put in internment camps. No right to a lawyer, no right to a trial. As George Carlin puts it, the only right they got was right this way. And yeah, they claimed, well, that'll never happen again, but then it could, because it's happened before. Anytime you set a precedent like that. I mean, I'll go into the notwithstanding. I talked about this in that video too, so if you want a more in-depth explanation, go there. But Doug Ford passes this bill that says he's going to use the notwithstanding clause and he's going to keep the support staff in the schools. What happens if nursing home workers want to strike? He could very easily say, well, COVID's been very hard on the elderly and we're not going to let them strike either. What happens if, some company, some industry decides they're going to strike? He could say, well, our economy is very weak right now and I don't think they should strike either. He could literally stop anyone from being able to strike for that 5-year period. and striking is protected under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So it's very sketchy, and like I say, privilege. It's a temporary privilege until they decide that it's inconvenient, and then all of a sudden, magically, it can go away. And that's what free speech is, unfortunately. I wish it was more than that, but it unfortunately really isn't. And in a way, that's our fault. As they're doing this stuff, like, okay, so I'll use the Ontario, the Doug Ford example again, right? First of all, the media, the news media, is portraying this in a very black and white way generally against the support staff. They're claiming it's all about money. They're making a whole bunch of claims that aren't generally true. Not only that, they are, and most people, by the way, are taking that at its word and been like, well, why should they get this percentage? They're asking for 11% increase. Why should they get it? They're not really asking for 11%. They would be good with. You can't go into a negotiation and say, okay, I want 2% if you want 2%. If the person says, okay, I'm going to give you 1%, you have to say, no, I want 3%, then maybe you'll get 2%. That's just how negotiation works. So that 11% number, they never wanted 11%. And incidentally, by the way, they just recently dropped down to 6%, but the Ontario government is refusing to even talk to them while they are illegally striking, which they are right now, which they should be, because the Ontario government should not be allowed to stop them to strike. So they're illegally striking. The good thing is that the other unions are supporting them, but unfortunately, I think it needs to go further than that. I think a lot of people need to wake up, because this might not affect you, per se. You may not be a part of a union, you may be working in a place that doesn't have a union, but maybe it's not affecting your union yet. But again, I've already explained, he could say that about any strike. He could have a good reason to stop any strike at this point. And by the way, he doesn't even need a reason. He just needs to pass the legislation. There's no accountability as long as he can pass it. So, I mean, okay, so it doesn't affect you, but what about your children? What about your grandchildren? What about anyone else? What about friends and family? You're saying it affects no one, or are you just saying, well, it's convenient for me not to care? And to me, that sort of indifference, because it's convenient, it's one of the worst crimes of all, in my opinion, because that allows atrocity to happen over and over again throughout history. You can look throughout all of history, and you can look at atrocities, and you can look at the people who didn't care enough to do anything about it. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not, like, for instance, saying that, well, you saying, well, this doesn't affect me to a labor dispute and a strike is the same as a person in Germany saying, well, this doesn't really affect me when they take all the Jews away. I'm not saying that by any means. Those are two very different things, and one isn't. But they are still at the same time part of that same mindset. And it has been shown that people will give a little bit, and then a little bit, and a little bit, and a little bit, and a little bit, and eventually get to the extreme. That can happen. Generally, they won't be like, oh, I'm going to be extreme today. But it can get eroded over time to the point where the extreme happens. And that's the problem, and that's the danger here. What else is there? Well, I'm going to be in another video that I filmed. I was going to do it here, but we're already past the hour point, and quite honestly, my throat's getting a little sore from speaking like this. So in another video, I'm going to talk about 3 Canadian examples of how freedom of speech and freedom of expression is being eroded here in Canada, or potentially eroded. I'll go into whether they are actually happening, whether it is actually eroding it, what we need to look out for using those 3 examples. And that will be another video. So until then, I hope you have a good day or week. And until the next time, I will see you then.